So
Yet they just
that's stop right there because
knowing.
I want to
Yeah.
bring that up. You cannot claim science for something you can't observe. If you can't observe the phenomenon, which nobody has observed this supposed question begged phenomenon of the species changing into other things, you didn't observe that. And no, finding fossils is not observing a phenomenon. That's not the same thing. So you can't, evolution is not scientific in any way, shape, or form.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Spencer Smith, and thanks for tuning back into my channel. Today, I'm joined with this very special guest. He's been on this channel before, actually. We talked about uh, scripturalism, or some people call it biblicism. I like them both, honestly, and how you can't know really anything apart from scripture. And honestly, this guy is the smartest guy I know. I'm gonna be honest. And if I have a question, I always run it past him. We're always messaging each other, sending each other content, sending each other uh, messages, and just asking each other their opinions on this stuff. But this guy's the smartest guy I know. So if I want to know something, I'm asking him. But today we're going to be talking about the scientific method, and we're going to be talking about how science is really misunderstood, especially today, and maybe, a little bit of other stuff about, just Christianity in general and how really the Christian has the answer, or the Christian worldview has a better foundation than this nonsense going on outside in the world today. But anyways, Jordan, why don't you give them a brief description on who you are and what you do so people can understand who you are?
Sure. Yeah, and thank you for those kind words because I'm not at all that way. You're much sharper than me, honestly. And at your, how old are you? Remind me.
26.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, man. Like I was 26 and I was just testing the waters with these topics, and then I went off to med school, and that sucked my life away for a long time. But yeah, my name's Jordan Grant. I'm just a guy. I'm an MD by trade, and so currently still practicing medicine, not in the traditional model anymore. We stopped doing that a little over a year ago, but yeah, just I love theology. I love philosophy. I've always loved thinking. I was the kid in literally 7 years old in Sunday school class asking about time and eternity, and the teacher looking at me like, "Please shut up," like I just like to ask questions and think about things, and that has carried forward. And I think in the last few years, I started looking into certain topics. 2020 brought a certain special topic to the forefront, and that led some down some rabbit trails. And it led into a study of natural science because people love to bring up the word science, especially in 2020, but with a lot of other topics too. And I think once I started going down that rabbit trail, and it took me back to philosophy. It took me back to Gordon Clark. It took me back to my foundations, actually, from when I was in my mid 20s before I went to med school. It took me back there, which brought me back to the Bible. And now all these things, it's you can't separate them. And so I think that's the beauty of all this is talking about these things because ideas have consequences. And I agree. I think the Christian worldview, yes, it has answers. Does that prove it's true? No, you can't prove that. But there are so many epistemological issues with the current stories that people tell, and so kind of like you're doing, where we need to be able to reduce other people's arguments to, and I don't want to say absurdity, and because it's not about making them look dumb, it's not about winning,
Yeah.
but it's about thinking properly.
Mm.
And so that's what I really enjoy the most, and where I don't make a lot of claims. And so when you contact me for answers, I don't usually give them. I usually give multiple scenarios, or here's how to ask questions. Like I don't make a lot of positive claims because I don't know a lot. I know that a lot of the things we're told have not been borne out. Let's just put it that way. I don't want to say the word proven because that's loaded.
Yeah,
But yeah, yeah,
ever since we've been talking, I hesitate to use the word proved or proof anymore
I
because
know.
it's such a truncated word. But I really like Gordon Clark. You mentioned Gordon Clark, and you've got me onto him, and I'm just reading him, listening to his lectures, and John Robbins and
Yes.
Raymond and all those guys, and being in
Yep.
that Bonson worldview. It's different, but
Yep.
I really like the just straight up 100 proof, Christianity. It's just,
Yep.
dude, you either believe it or you don't.
That's right.
And I kind
That's
of
right.
like that. Jesus is like, look, are you going to go? He says to his disciples. And Peter's like, where shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. That's Christianity.
Yep.
Where shall you go?
That's right.
And Clark said, and you let me borrow your book. I'm gonna have to buy that book, but uh, the three types of religious philosophy. I forget the page number, but I have the quote almost memorized. But he says basically there are two options, right? You have scripturalism or dogmatism. He liked to call it dogmatism, or suicide, and by that he meant intellectually suicide.
Yeah.
And I just love that because he was just like basically if you don't have scripture and that like you said doesn't prove it to be true, but if you don't have scripture as your foundation or your starting point, you're intellectually, suicide. But that goes back to our first podcast. But
Yeah.
to talk about this, you said you were an MD. What was? Can you tell the people what field you were in?
Sure. Yeah. So I was a urologist by training, urinary tract pathologies and things like that. And my wife and I are both urologists, and we practiced for, I guess, 7 years maybe out of residency. So 5 years of residency, and then 7 years of practice. And I focus mainly on hormonal optimization in men. I've always loved that. I've always loved health and fitness, and you know, um, I got a big practice and a big following doing that. And so that's what we do primarily now only. And so the hormone part is honestly the small. It's a big part, but it's a small part. I do this more to talk to men about their lives, about their sleep habits, about their diets, about honestly about every aspect that you can talk about. And so I try to do it more from a holistic standpoint because at the end of the day, like a lot of people just need somebody to kind of like an accountability partner.
Oh.
And that's kind of what this is. It's really just keeping people on the tracks when the ones that want to do better, some of them still need that kick in the pants, and they need to run stuff by people. And so that's what I do. I communicate with every patient I have, text messaging. It's just building relationships. It's doing it a different way. I wanted to try to do it a way that was my own and
Mm.
not beholden to the system as much as I could. I mean, yeah, we still have a medical license and all the nonsense, but um, try to do it a way that made sense for me, and my wife's doing the same thing on her own terms. So um, we got out, after 2020. That's when I really started seeing the medical system in a different light. And once I started studying more topics, I mean, I always knew certain things were nonsense, but you kind of just got to get through in med school. You got to, it's, was it drinking out of a fire hose is what they call it. And it's true. The amount of things you have to memorize are insane. And it's not knowledge, it's just facts. It's just stuff that you have to know for the test, whether it's true or not, doesn't matter. And I remember being in med school even, and like I had Gordon Clark in my head because it wasn't that long after reading, philosophy of science and belief in God. I read in med school. Actually, I read in the call room when I was on my OB-GYN rotation. I remember reading that book at night, and it was just like, holy crap. And you start seeing these things for what they are. But anyway, but medicine, people think is sciencey, right? They think that's science. Not even close. Not even close. So we can talk about that. But that's the funny part too, is like I see doctors now, and they're like, I'm a scientist. And I'm like, really? Let's talk about that, So
Yeah.
that's what we do.
Well,
So
you're the thorn in the flesh. How do you know that to your professors or to to your practice? Those people. Yeah,
yeah.
we're very annoying to people, but that's
Yes.
just because we're annoying doesn't mean you have an answer. You still don't have an answer. How do you know that? You got to justify it. We're not,
Exactly.
yeah, we're not asking for much. We're just asking for justification. But anyways, yeah, so let's get into this topic of science and let's run through what is a basic definition for someone like, who's just getting into this and they're a Christian, right? They're reading their Bible.
Mhm.
They get bombarded by the quote unquote scientist and the leading voices like Richard Dawkins, cosmic skeptic, and so on and so forth. And
Right.
they say things like, well, you dumb Christian, you fundamentalist, you believe the King James or whatever, you believe the Bible. Don't you know evolution is a scientific fact, you big dummy? You know, what would you say to them? Some atheists off the street just saying that to the Christian, who just believe in the Bible. What are you going to say to that?
Yeah. Well, I don't think most Christians would know what to say because they don't know what science is, but neither does the atheist. And so that's what I would start with. Anytime somebody's making a claim, the first step is to define your terms, in my opinion. Like that's what, and I know that seems pedantic. I get it. Shout out to Kelly Moody for the T-shirt that says Buzzkill, because I am Buzzkill. I will ask, even in a meme, it's like, what does that mean? What's that word? You know what I mean? Like, but you have to define your terms first of all. So if an atheist started spouting things about evolution being a scientific fact, I'd probably first ask, well, what is evolution? Can you give me the scientific theory of evolution in one sentence or two? Because that's what a scientific theory should be. We'll talk about that. Um, they don't know what that means. They don't even know what they're talking about. And then so a lot of times they end up just spouting like tautologies, like this is just what it is. It's like,
Yeah.
okay. But when they say scientific fact, you go, well, what is science, and how is it proven to be a scientific fact? What does that mean? And they don't know, so they'll usually just appeal to somebody else, or they'll call you a name, or don't you? Everybody knows, they'll appeal to consensus. Like, it gets very frustrating. So for those type of people, honestly, I'm not going to converse with them on the topic. I can't do it, because I
Yeah.
personally like to talk to people that are interested in topics. And even if they disagree, they're still like, okay, yeah, I can, you know what I mean? Like, can see what you're saying. But when it comes to science, there used to be an actual definition. And I'm talking about natural science here. That's what most people, when people use the term proven by science, or the science says, or any of those things, they're appealing to cause and effect. That's what they're talking. They're talking about something has been proven true. And usually it's in the realm of cause and effect, which is what natural science is supposed to be about. You could broaden the category, and that's fine as long as you're doing it and know what you're saying, like the science of flying a kite, the science of baking a cake. It doesn't mean natural science. That just means science it's a different meaning of the term, and that's fine. And I think people equivocate a lot and don't realize that, but that's why you have to define your terms. Because when you're talking about the stories we're being fed on cosmology or whatever else, biology, molecular biology, genetics, genomics, disease, you name it, the nature of Earth, whatever it is, when you're talking about that and they use the word science, that has a very narrow meaning. And so that's where I like to nail down and drill down on what are we talking about in the first place.
Yeah. Should I read that one quote from the slides you gave me? You gave a definition of natural science, and I'll read it. You said it was a good definition. I'm not sure where you got it from, but it says basically that natural science, quote, a major branch of science that tries to explain and predict nature's phenomena based on empirical evidence. And natural science hypothesis must be verified scientifically to be regarded as scientific theory. Is that a good
Ooh.
definition?
That is, I would boil it down probably.
Mhm.
But that is the fact that they included the hypothesis part. That's the
Sure.
key. Okay, experimentation is the key to natural science. Okay, and there's this huge, you can look up papers, debates between the observationalists and the experimentalists, right? Like this has gone around for a long time. I mean, because people want their systems, they want to justify the claims they make, whether it's an experimentalist wanting to justify the claims he's made, or whether it's just somebody with a bunch of observational studies and correlative nonsense making up stories and passing it off as a fact. They don't like each other, right? There's always this stuff. It's the same in preterism, whatever.
Yeah.
But in the end, natural science, at least old school, when people still cared about these things, if you look back, let's say like early to mid 1900s, was always about natural science. It was always about cause and effect. And you to be able to prove, I'll use the term,
Yeah,
or
sure.
validate a hypothesis. Well, then we have to define these terms. What is a hypothesis? All
Right.
this. So I would boil it down this way and say the purpose, you have to know the purpose of natural science. You have to know the purpose of the scientific method, right? Because that's what they'll bring out the word scientific method, but then they don't actually know what that means either.
Right.
And so the scientific method has these several steps, but a bigger picture purpose of the method is to try to ascertain the cause of an observed natural phenomenon.
Okay.
That's the basics of it. So if you're not even talking about an observed natural phenomenon, it's not natural science anymore, which should be
Wow.
basic because,
Yeah.
but people try to hoodwink that with technology. They have all this stuff they're doing in a lab, or they're making stuff or doing this, and they'll try to appeal to the science of, paint mixing, or the science. What it's like, that's not science, right? The science of who makes the better tire, like that's not science.
Science of
That's technology.
mathematics. Science
Yeah.
of mathematics or
Oh,
anything like that.
that's complete nonsense. Science is not math. Math is logic and language. It's
Yeah.
not science. You're not ascertaining cause and effect with math. You can describe with math because it's a language, but you can use math just like you can use words. You can use it for fiction or for nonfiction. It's no different. But for natural science, again, scientific method, you're going to have several steps. And if you look this up, there's like so many bad ones out there, honestly, because they fill in other stuff. But the gist of the scientific method is, number one, your first step is to observe that phenomenon, right? That's
Mm.
obviously you've already done that if you're looking
Right.
into it. But you have to observe it happening. That just means something happening. We could get into details on what does that even mean? What's a phenomenon? What's not a phenomenon? I think I put it in, I can't remember if it was that presentation or a different one I did. I think it was Niels Bohr or Ernst Mach, one of those guys defined it as, it has to be something happening. It can't just
Right.
be like an object. Like looking at a static object is not looking at a phenomenon. It has to be
Right.
something going on, like a tree growing or a leaf falling from a tree. I mean, it could be anything, something really silly, or it could be something more complex, like why do the lights in the sky move the way they do,
Sure. Sure.
But you have to have the observed phenomenon to begin with. Okay.
Right.
People getting sick, right? Whatever. And so then you have to form a hypothesis. And so this is where I think a lot of people don't really understand what a hypothesis is, maybe.
Right.
But a hypothesis is an educated prediction, a scientific prediction, meaning I'm guessing what causes that effect that I'm seeing. I'm going to postulate the cause of that effect, and then I'm going to test it. Okay. So if you postulate a hypothesis, or if you give a possible cause for something, that cause has to be real. You can't just make it up out of thin air. Okay. So, like, we'll take it to virology. Okay. When people say, oh, my hypothesis for why those people got the sniffles is that a virus caused it. And you go, can you show me a virus in nature? Can you
Mm.
show me one? Can you show, how did that ever become a hypothesis? Well, it didn't. You can't find a
Wow.
single paper where that was ever a valid hypothesis. In fact, there's no experimentation at all done with viruses because nobody's ever seen them or found them in a human being. It's a construct. And
They
it's
don't
actually
have the observed phenomena.
they
They
only
don't have
have,
the observed
well, they
phenomena.
had people getting sniffles, right? You have people getting
Well, I
sick.
guess, yeah, sure.
Yep. Yep.
But they've never seen the virus. Is that what you're saying? They've never
The,
seen that?
right. The possible cause, for it to be a possible cause that you can test, it has to exist first, right? Like,
Wow.
I don't get to say, I think gnomes trampled my backyard, and
Right.
that's what caused the grass to be trampled, right? I don't get to do that until I first show you that gnomes exist. And then once I do, I still have to prove they're the ones that trampled my yard. So
Mm.
it's like crop circles, right? It's like people saying aliens did it. It's like, can you show me an alien?
Right.
And obviously, that's not a natural phenomenon because I can't very manipulate an alien to make him cause a crop circle, but the point is the same.
Right.
You still have to show that those aliens first even exist to be a possibility for the effect. Then you have to prove they did it. So it's the
Wow.
same thing in the natural world. You have to first know all possible causes. Well, we're not omniscient, so it's already off the table.
Right.
But to stick with the textbook, you postulate a cause and then you have to test it. That's it.
Wow.
And that's your experiment. That's what an experiment is. People use the word experiment wrong all the time.
Sure.
They think lab testing or doing things is experimenting. Demonstrations are not experiments. Demonstrations are demonstrations. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not an experiment. An experiment has both an independent and a dependent variable. Okay. And that's part of what we're talking about here with the scientific
Right.
method. Your dependent variable is the phenomenon that you saw. That's all that is. It's your effect. Your independent variable is your supposed cause. That's the thing the researcher varies and manipulates to
Right.
see if it causes the outcome that they saw in nature.
Right.
You have to also have controls. You have to supposed to control every other variable involved in the process.
Wow.
Oh, well, that's some philosophical issues there, but let's skip that. But that's what science, in a nutshell, the scientific method is. It is experimentation to try and ascertain the cause of an observed phenomenon. That's it. So when people say trust the science or the science says this or this, then I just always ask them, what's your observed phenomenon? What are you studying? What's your independent variable? Please show me can you send me the paper? Send me the experiment. Send it to me. And they don't even know what you're talking about. They
Wow.
don't have a clue
Wow.
because it's never been done usually.
Wow.
And so, well, that's an issue because if you're trying to make a causation claim without the scientific method, then what are your options? What do you do? Well, in the medical world, you have correlation studies, you have observational studies. Well, we're taught from day one, correlation is not causation. So in the medical world, they will use observational studies, right, to try to make causation claims. But we're taught from day one, correlation is not causation, which is true because you can't just correlate things and make it say that that's the cause. It doesn't work that way. I can correlate all kinds of things together, and that they may not even be related. But that's what's done, and that's the problem, I would say, in medical science. It's not science.
Mm.
You're just doing a lot of statistics, and statistics. I tell this to my patients all the time. Statistics don't tell you anything about you at all. They're a look back, first of all, at a past, and it's a accumulation of data that's then put on a normal bell curve, typically. And you're like, oh, okay, so where am I on that bell curve, or will I even be on it when
Yeah.
I do this? When I do this thing that I'm supposed to be doing, like take this medicine, it's like I don't know, I don't have a clue because I don't know the future. Nobody does. So
Wow.
it's inductive nonsense basically.
Yeah.
Statistics is all induction. You can't close the induction because you can't sample everything in all times, past, present, and future,
Sure.
to come up with a general claim, a
Yeah.
universal claim. You can't do it because it's already off the rails because everybody's got different results when they do something, right?
That's my
Uh,
frustration. They always move from a localized study of, say, 1,500 people, and they move from that to a universal claim.
that's right.
That's so frustrating. And inductive reasoning, it seems to me, from what I'm understanding from inductive, observations and whatnot, it seems like it's always going to end up in a formally fallacious almost. It's going to end up in being fallacious at some point.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
I mean, induction itself is fallacious. When you
yeah,
cannot make a general universal claim from a set of limited particulars, whereas deduction starts with a universal, and you can always go from a universal to a particular because you have your principle. That's why we live by principles anyway, right? With all these things, you have to live by principles. But that's how deduction works. Induction is the opposite. I think John Robbins gave an example in one of his lectures about counting chairs in a room. Well, you can only make claims about those specific chairs. You can't extrapolate that to any other chairs. Now,
right.
if you only make the claim about every chair in this room and then make deductions from that, well, that's you close the induction in that room, but it can't apply anywhere else, you know? And
Yeah.
so that's another huge philosophical blunder. I mean, it's the best people got, but that's not a good reason. Just because that's all you can do and you come up with these numbers, that doesn't make it legitimate. It doesn't make it valuable. Like I always tell this to patients, guys in our Facebook groups and stuff will be like, what are you guys doing for X protocol? And I'm like, why are you polling people about what they're doing? Because it won't have anything to do with what's going to happen to you
Yeah.
because it's all over the map. You've got the bell curve, you've got the outliers. Nothing anybody else is doing may affect what you're going to do. And you
Wow.
have to just do it. You just got to try something. Trial and error is the key. And that's where technology comes from, is trial and error. It's not from all the science stuff, right? It's people doing things and getting an effect they like, and then they hone it, and then they do things over time, and it gets better and better and better and better. And
Right.
I've literally seen people say, like, my fairy tale story, whatever it is true because computers work. And I'm like, that's fallacious, right? That's like textbook affirming the consequent fallacy.
Oh my gosh.
If my story is true, then computers will work. Well, computers work, so yeah, that must be the right story. It's like, no, that's not
But
how it works.
you sent me something this morning from a section or an excerpt from a book from someone. I'm not sure who it was, but she or he was talking about. I'm going to put it up on the screen.
Sweet.
It's talking about agrochemical stuff, right? These farmers spraying these crops. This is a textbook affirming the consequent. I mean, there's many different definitions for this, but or examples of this, I should say. You got people spraying the crops, and that produces bad gut health, right? And we see people with bad gut health, therefore,
It's from spraying the crops.
spraying the crops is the problem. It's like,
That's
well,
right.
how do you know that
You
though? There
don't.
could have been so many different. It could have been someone who had, some kind of sickness, or there's so many different things to take
Variables.
in, to factor in,
Variables.
variables to
Yeah,
factor. So I mean, this stuff is endless.
that's
So
right.
you mentioned in your presentation that you sent me, which is excellent. You said some people are like, "Well, I got pneumonia sitting next to someone on the bus." How do you know that? It could have been a million different ways that
That's
you
right.
got that. So
That's right. Yep.
that stuff is just like endless. It never. And once you know how to spot affirming the consequent, you point this out constantly. You'll never
You'll
yeah,
never unsee
see
it. You'll never
it.
unsee it. It's every day. Almost every argument I get for somebody's pet belief is an affirming the consequent fallacy. They will point to some effect to make claims of causation, and I'm like, you can't do that unless that's the only possible reason for that effect, and you
Mm,
have to prove that when they don't even know what that means. It's the same thing with the virology stuff, and I mean, people literally, this is how, and I'm not knocking people because we all have blind spots. We all take shortcuts mentally. We're all so ingrained with our beliefs that it throws a monkey wrench when you hear that this is a fallacy. But like my mom did this, right? When talking about COVID, and I was talking to her about how viruses have never been proven to exist in the first place. She literally goes, "So you don't think people get sick?"
Yeah, that's that. How did you affirm the consequent? That's literally smuggled into
It,
the
it's
first.
she's begging the question that that's the reason people get sick, and if that's not true, then people don't get sick. It's like, mom, I'm a doctor. People get sick just because I'm not denying, and I see this everywhere. I saw it in Alex Zek, one of his posts on
Yeah.
Instagram. A girl, I can't remember if it was him or no, it was a different girl. She said something about the sun gave her skin cancer,
Right.
and I was like, how do you know that? Why are you saying that? And all these people are chiming in too, saying like, you don't know that. People started getting mad, saying you are denying her experience. It's like, no, the effect is real. Whatever you want to call cancer, whatever she's going through is very real. It's the
Pause.
story
Yeah, that's
that's
right.
not proven. These are two separate things. And people cannot, this was my big pet peeve the last 4 or 5 years. People cannot separate out real effect from claimed cause. They
Mm.
cannot do it. When they have that claimed cause in their head and you challenge them on it, they will hate you for it. When patients came into the clinic going, yeah, I got pneumonia when I went to that ER sitting by somebody, and I go, how do you know that? Like they don't like that. They don't like being asked that. And I don't do that most. I mean, I let people
Yeah,
have
they're
their
writing the
story.
check.
I mean, it's not even that. It's like it's not worth it
Yeah,
because
that's true.
you can't get into a long argument with people on that because that breaks down so many things. You have to go in your mind and break down, break down, break down. But again, this became the repetitive theme that I kept seeing is that people are bound to these stories that they're told for reasons why certain things happen. And once they have that in their mind, that, oh, that's just the fact, they can't entertain that they're using affirming the consequent fallacies to prove what they're claiming. They just end up begging the question, and that's all it is in a circle. And honestly, I will say this: I do think in the end, and I fought this tooth and nail until recently, is that the scientific method itself is the result. The method is still affirming the consequent because you're appealing to the results of your experiment to claim that, well, what I did caused that, and it's like, well, unless I have omniscience, I don't know that. I
Wow.
don't I don't know that. And also, even if I can say, yeah, me doing that in the lab caused that phenomenon, that has no bearing on the phenomenon I'm looking at in nature. I don't have a clue that I reproduced it in the same way it's being made in nature because I
Right.
don't know how it's made. God didn't tell me. He
Yeah.
didn't give me every variable for how that's happening. It may not have anything to do with some mechanistic, materialistic cause in the first place. But people don't like that either. They don't like thinking it's not just this mechanistic world. But we don't know. Again, you have to stop where information stops. Well, we don't have the information. We are completely ignorant. I don't know what variables I could control. You know what I mean? Like we don't know all the variables. So how could you possibly ever conduct a
Wow.
valid experiment?
Yeah, into universals to go from
That's
that
right.
to universals.
Exactly.
That frustration that I keep seeing with these guys.
Yep.
But what I'm hearing from you is that all of what these people are saying, not all, I should say,
At all.
maybe I should specify and not broad brush to be fair. But for instance, atoms, molecules, or whatever,
Yep.
that's just taken for granted. Science, man. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever seen
No.
an atom? And
No.
not only that, back to evolution. Has anyone ever seen the origin? You weren't there.
So
Yet they
that's
just
that's stop right there because I want
knowing.
I want to
Yeah,
bring that up. You cannot claim science for something you can't observe. If you can't observe the phenomenon, which nobody has observed this supposed question begged phenomenon of the species changing into other things, you didn't observe that. And no, finding fossils is not observing a phenomenon. That's not the same thing. So you can't, evolution is not scientific in any way, shape, or form. There is no scientific theory of evolution. Theories come after experiment, by the way. A
right.
scientific theory comes at the end, a hypothesis comes at the beginning. So
Yes,
people conflate those all the time. Even people in science,
right.
they use the words incorrectly, and I know what they mean, but it's like it helps to be pedantic because we need to be on the same page.
Well, these guys are held up high. They should know.
They don't
Like
know.
you pointed that out with Stephen Hawkins. He even
Yep.
conflated the
Yep.
two. He didn't understand the difference. Or maybe he did, or he was just like lazy and he didn't want
There
to.
are very few purists when it comes to this. I'll just say it's no different than philosophy. Like Clark, I would consider a purist.
Oh yeah.
It's rare. It's rare to find people who take every claim on its own. Like I don't care my biases are. I don't care. I don't care if you're on my team and the opposite team. If you're saying things fallaciously, if you can't back up what you say, you need to be called on it. We need to all hold each other's feet to the fire and go, whoa, whoa, whoa. How do you know that? Like, do you know it? Or are you speculating? If you're speculating, just say it. Just say it. Get it off the table. Get it out there, and then we're good. Because I'm like, well, yeah, that's a cool story, bro, but it may not be true. Just because here's another thing, okay? And this is again affirming the consequent. People think if they can come up with the best explanation for something, here's the latest, right? And I think I put it in the presentation that Lakatos actually said it. He was one of the philosophers of science, didn't know what science was apparently, that his belief was that until a new theory, meaning story, comes along and replaces the old one still stands. It's like,
Right.
was this a battle between like 5-year-olds telling
Right.
stories? Like that's insane. But you see it in theology too. You see it all the time. My these guys like, oh, our system works. It's like define works. That's
Yeah.
affirming the consequent in and of itself.
Yeah.
Appealing to what works has nothing to do with the truth of the matter. Now, it's fine if you're trying to get something to work in the tech world because that's all you care about. I don't care about the reason it's working.
Yeah.
I want my light to come on. I don't care if there's little unicorns in there making it glow. I don't care if it's electrons that nobody can see. It's the same thing, right?
Right.
You can't prove it either way. But what's interesting when you go back to the atom and electron thing, if you actually talk to some people online about electrons and atoms, they will readily admit without realizing what they're doing that no, those have never been proven. But then they try to justify it by appealing to what works.
Yeah.
So they don't understand that they're affirming the consequence. Some do. I found one quote. I'll send it to you. I think I
Yeah.
forgot. Where he was basically begging to be able to affirm the consequent. He got it. He was like, it was like in a forum, in like a science forum. He's like, guys, I think we're affirming the consequent by doing this, saying this, this, and this. He's like, but what else can we do? It's like, well, yeah, if you want to push your story, that's what you have to do.
Right.
You have to affirm the consequence to push your story as fact. And it's like, it's just frustrating because
Yeah.
people need their stories to be true for whatever reason it is. And I don't care.
Mm.
And the story, it may be true by accident. Like we may find out one day that was the right answer, but you didn't get there with sound argumentation.
That's the
Uh,
point that I'm wanting to hone in on, especially
yeah,
as Christians.
exactly.
As Christians, we have to really be intellectually honest. And it's hard. I get it. I really do. I really get it that we want to cut the chase. We want to be, easy and, rush and
Loving.
jump the gun, but we can't. We
That's
have
right.
to make sure we're working all of this out. So you got these Christians who are trying to combat, and I know they're genuine. I know
Mm-hmm.
they love the Lord, but they're trying to combat these evolutionists and their science, right?
Yep.
And they're doing the same stuff.
Yep.
And it's annoying. We just
Yep.
need to call it out and just say, as Christians, we ought not we ought not do that because everyone, I posted this on my Facebook, everyone has their own stories. I mean, you look up on the internet, look how the freaking naturalists get water to Earth. It's insane. They got the
Yes.
and just asteroids that were frozen and then they thawed out and it's like what the hell are you talking about, dude? And then they got the
Moon.
moon was some asteroid was banged into the earth and then all these stories
Yep.
and people are like mad at us Christians saying, oh, you're stupid for believing that God created the earth in freaking 6 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do believe that,
Yeah.
but I'm freaking getting grilled by atheists because I'm dumb, like I'm
Well,
somehow dumb for believing the Bible.
and
Talking about
you're not claiming you can prove it.
right.
I mean, that's the thing. They think that it's proven. It's like what are you smoking, man? You think you can prove something that you think happened 4+ billion years ago?
The
Like
number changes, by the way. I
I
mean,
know,
maybe it's
I
a
know.
300 trillion now. I don't know.
It's so nonsensical on so many levels, and all these things are that way. Whether it's light years, whether it's lights in the sky and what those are, whether it's what
Right.
we live on, the Earth, the heliocentrism. Like people don't like this topic because it's uncomfortable, and
Yeah.
they've people have pigeonholed me as a flat earther for asking questions. It's like I don't know what the Earth is. I'm not making the positive claims.
Right.
I'm asking people to back up their claims.
Yeah.
And when I ask, if you want to see every affirming the consequent you can imagine, start asking people for proof for that we live on a globe.
Right.
You will get nothing but affirming the consequent fallacies and category errors.
Yeah.
Everyone will point to the sky. It's like, I don't point to the popcorn on my ceiling to say anything about my floor.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just insane. And they'll say, but because they don't realize they're already begging the question of the story that
Mm.
they've been given, and then they point to the effect and go, well, obviously that's why it is because I already believe it's that way. Like
Yeah.
that's not a proof. I mean,
It's so dumb.
it's crazy.
Well,
Um,
you shared that one, and this is another textbook storytelling, affirming the consequent. A person you sent it to me a while back, some form, I'm not sure, a comment section. The guy was like, "Well, hey, we see lights in the sky moving. What was it, clockwise or something like that?" And
yeah,
he's like, "Well, that shows that we're on a globe." What?
it's
I could put lights on a terrain like a flat lizard cage
yes,
and to get that sucker to spin clockwise, zigzagged, and doesn't change
anything
anything what's on the ground. And
exactly.
these guys are just making up stuff. And they say we're, again, I rant about this stuff to my wife and she's tired of hearing.
Same. Oh, I've done it for years. My wife's like, please shut up.
Shut up.
Because it's all variations on a theme. These are the same things in every field of study. It's the same fallacies, it's the same issues, it's the same foundational epistemological issues, right? That's what this boils down to. You can't escape it. You can't escape how do you know that? How
Mm,
do you know that you know that you know? How do you know that your methodology is correct? Like, when you look at the problem of the criterion in epistemology, all that is, it's just another variation of how do you know that your method for knowledge is right? Because you end up in a
mm.
circle of knowledge of like, well, how do I know that I know that it's the same thing
Wow.
with your method for science. Is how do I know that's the right method? And so I will say this: a lot of things we can't say everything's fake, and that's what people will. They'll try to do the kind of hasty generalization. Oh, you think all that's not proven, so you think everything's fake? It's like, yeah, I didn't say that.
Right.
I
Right.
said these specific things haven't been proven. That doesn't mean other things, number one, aren't useful. Okay, so laws. Let's go with quote unquote
Sure.
scientific laws. Let's talk about that. Number
Yeah.
one, laws are not scientific because science deals with cause and effect.
Wow.
Laws are descriptive. They're descriptors of something happening, and usually in the form of an equation, usually applied to man-made technology, where they've made out equations to describe what they've done with math, which is fine. It's not science, okay? And they're not universal laws of the universe. That's the other problem. People think that if they can do some tech, a lot of weird stuff that really has no value whatsoever, or it might, and they can come up with some equations to they think that explains it, even though they're not manipulating any variables. But you can always reverse engineer your effect with equations. I can reverse engineer anything because I already have the effect. I have the outcome, so I know how to get there. I did this all the time early on in school with math problems all the time. There's so many ways to get to your final answer, and you can start inserting all kinds of variables that don't exist and still get the right outcome answer to match. And that's what these guys don't understand: is that just because you can describe something with math, let's say like eclipses, right?
Mm.
Quote unquote, because they think because, oh, well, they can predict when those are going to happen. Well, yeah, it's like watching a clock long enough. You know what the hands are going to do. That has nothing to do with science. It's
Yeah.
absurd.
Right.
But again, it doesn't mean it's not useful. All of
Sure.
this stuff can be useful. It's just not. It's not validated your story. I do this in genetics and genomics. People think I'm nuts. I'm a doctor, asking these questions, but I literally got kicked out of a truther group. Truther,
That's
because he was posting some stuff about polymerase chain reaction and genomics, and this was an antivirus guy. And I said, how were nucleotides ever proven to exist? Like, can you show me the foundational paper where a nucleotide single, because that's what they claim makes up a gene, right? Single letters that make up a gene, these AGs and T's and C's,
right.
molecules. Show me that. Where were those found to exist in a singular form? Because if you don't have the letter, you can't have the word, which is the gene,
Wow.
right? I was banned for asking the question. And so that sent up some little antenna, at first. And so I just started asking more and more people that. I have a friend and she runs during COVID, she actually came out against it and she ran polymerase chain reaction tests for a living. Like she's a PhD. And I asked her, I said, how do you know that these primers you guys claim you're making How do you make them? How do you know you're making? How do you know this structure is the right way? She said, well, the computer tells us. I'm like, well, that's not an answer because somebody programmed the computer. So
Wow.
how did they program it? How did they know to do it that way? And I don't think she talked to me for like a year, and she's come out now going, yeah, it's all nonsense. Like, not that that proves it's nonsense, but I'm just saying you have to ask the right questions, and
It's not
that's what
proven.
people. That's right. People don't know how to ask these questions. You have to go to foundations. I do it with statism. I did it today on
Yeah,
Facebook.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you claim you've got authority to delegate somebody else with a vote, where'd you get it? Where'd you get that authority? Walk me through it. Walk me through the chain of authority down to the foundational starting point. They can't do it, not usually without being circular. And so it's the same thing for all these topics is you always want to break it down and get to the foundational part, the big picture point. Like, and yes, it's how do you know that, but it depends on the topic, right, that you're talking about. So for me, like, yeah, with atoms or all that, it's like, can you show me one? Just
Sure.
show me one. Like, that's it. It doesn't mean
Or
all
else it's
your,
not scientific.
that's,
It's
it's not,
not, yeah, it's not even
no,
close because you can't observe
no,
or nor could you manipulate
no,
the variable or
no.
whatever. You
That's
can't
right.
put it through the method.
That's
So
right.
how do you know? And
That's
you
right.
just keep asking, how do you know? How
That's
do you
right.
know? How do you know?
That's
And
right.
they'll ban you. They'll shut you. Oh, you're just one of. It's kind of funny that you got banned from the truther group.
Yeah.
Golly,
Yeah.
that's saying something.
That was about 4 years ago. Ironically, he came out with a Substack the other day questioning genomics. I was like, wow, that's amazing. I wonder if I'll get an apology for that one. It won't
Yeah.
happen.
So,
It doesn't,
so
I don't care.
with genomics, so when you look at the DNA, what they're saying, right? And I remember reading about this, and they discovered it what in the 60s or something like that. And what it came out to me was like a mathematical equation, some sort reverse engineered into what they think is
So
in our bodies.
yes, that's what they do with everything. Okay, so that's what kind of clued me off to the genomic stuff. When I go, well, okay, these tests they're running. I mean, we learned this stuff, some of it at least, in undergrad and then in med school. You're running gel electrophoresis. Okay, so you're taking chemicals and then you're running an electrical charge and you're seeing these chemicals spread apart on a gel. That's macro level. I can see those things.
Mm.
And then they take those and go, that's a genetic sequence. I'm like, what? Like a genetic
How'd you get
sequence?
there?
Like, how'd you get a sequence of individual, invisible, unidentifiable, unprovable nucleotides in a row with macro level gels on a, you know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
it's the same thing with DNA and X ray crystallography. It's insane. They just take stuff, precipitate it into a crystal that I could literally see with my naked eye, fire some X rays through it, get an image on a wall, and then they start talking about 3D structures of the atomic or model or the molecular structure. It's like, dude, it's just a Rorschach test. Like, what the crap is wrong with you guys? I
Wow.
can't believe this ever passed muster. I can't believe you guys weren't laughed out of your lab. Um, like, where are the people calling this out? Where are the philosophers? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
It's horrible. So that's what they do. They get macro level effects by doing crap in a lab they don't even know what they're doing, and they make up a story about it. It's the same thing with lab work in medicine. You literally could have you could do the same thing by taking a person's blood and mixing it with frog saliva and the semen of a goat and
Yeah.
mixing it around, doing some voodoo, getting an outcome by how they mix together, and then you have to make up a story about what that means. You have to assign meaning to that lab. Well, that's what they do, and that's what your lab work is doing essentially. I mean, because if you start looking at these compounds they claim they're finding, you go, okay, how was that ever identified in the first place? How would you know how to isolate anything from the body if you don't already know what's in the body to isolate?
Wow.
How? How would you
Yeah.
know? How would you even design the test because you don't even know what you're looking for?
Hmm.
So that's the problem, right? And so what they do, it's the same thing with a lot of the chemicals and things that they claim are these natural substances. Periodic table, same thing.
Right, right,
Most
right.
they're man-made. It's man-made processes and byproducts from chemical processes, and they're claiming they discovered something. It's like, how do you know that? How do you know you discovered it and didn't create it in the process?
That's
I mean, I know it sounds
yeah.
silly.
No, it doesn't sound silly. It's asking honest questions, and people are going to be like, but it questions everything. And that's
Yep,
exactly right,
that's the
because
point.
everything,
Yeah,
I have to be careful saying this, but a lot of things that we were taught are not necessarily have ever been
agree.
validated or, they haven't. So
Yes,
when they claim they just attach science to it, and everyone's
yep,
like, oh, they
yes,
got a PhD, they got
yep,
a,
yep.
okay.
They must know they're smarter than you. I'm like, that's not an argument. That's an ad hom.
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
once you know
Appeal
the
to consensus
fallacies,
is a fallacy. Appeal
yeah,
to authority is fallacy. All of that
absolutely,
stuff is So, what's your proof? Justify it, and you can't. They can't.
they can't do it. And
So,
that's
and
the
that's what
point.
you have to just keep pushing that, and
Yep.
and
That's
will
the
they be able to
point.
do it? I don't think they will.
And honestly, I know people don't like it, but like that's the Socratic method, is it not? Is that not what we're supposed to be doing? Before you can make a judgment, you have to hear the full picture. You have to know the details. You have to know as much as you possibly can. And people don't care about that. It's the same thing. And think about a jury. Think about a courtroom. You've got competing lawyers literally appealing to the emotions of a crowd with circumstantial evidence, affirming the consequent. That's what circumstantial evidence
Oh
is.
yeah,
Um, and that's justice. Like that's insane because they can't. If they could prove it and show who it was, you've already proven it. You already have it. There's no jury. There's nothing to debate. That's what I tell people about debates. Why are we debating something if it's a matter of something that's proven? There's nothing to debate if it's proven, and if it's not proven, then we're speculating. So I still don't understand the reason for debate unless it's with logic. So with scripture,
mm,
there is a such thing as proof in logic. Logical proofs, when you have premises to conclusions,
right.
that's legit. When we're
Deductive
talking about the natural world and all this stuff, that's not
flux.
deduction.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
flux. It's always changing, and then
that's
you
right.
can never generalize to a universal from a flux world. That's always
Exactly.
changing because
Yep.
the possibilities or the causes are endless.
Yeah,
And
we don't even know. We don't
yeah,
know what's going on. Like that's the whole issue, is that problem of not knowing. And I'm sure there's a fancy philosophical name for that. I can't remember. I need to look it up. Jay Dyer mentioned him, and I've read some of his stuff. His name is Quine,
oh yeah, yeah,
Quine,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there was a specific problem that he brought up because he was very much against the logical positivists of his
oh yeah.
time, and basically negated all of that, which was a raw form of empiricism, like just nailed it to the wall. And I can't remember what the problem was, but it was just that they're all problems. They're a variation on the theme of how do you know that you know that you know. That's it.
Mhm.
That's all it is. This stuff is not as hard as people make it out to be. And again, the philosophy side, there's full of people that I feel like are just making up stories too. That's literally the story of philosophy. If you go
Oh, it's
back and
Paul.
read, yeah,
Paul.
yes, people love to sit around and talk about stuff and just
Yeah.
men love to tell big tales, right? That's what's going on now. But when you attach the word science to it, that they think that greases the skids for their story to come in. Well, here's the issue. And we talked about pseudoscience earlier, right? Well, if you look
Yeah,
up
yeah.
the definition of pseudoscience, it's very simple. It's anything claiming to be scientific which has not been put through the scientific method. Well, there's your definition of science by an anti definition. You know what I mean? By
Right.
the negation. It's brilliant, and it's just like, okay, well, there you go. So if you guys are claiming science and you haven't been even attempted to put something through the scientific method, you need to go back and do that first before we talk again. Now, all this other stuff, if it's not claiming to be science, that's okay. There are things that aren't science that still like baking a cake, like baking,
Right.
which is actually more scientific, quote unquote, than a lot of the crap they're spinning to us. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
I want to get back real quick though to this
Sure. Go
problem
ahead.
of not knowing.
Yeah.
It would be like trying to unbake a cake when you didn't even know what the original ingredients were. Okay, you can't. Number one, we can't unbake cakes, even though we
Right.
do know what the ingredients are. We have that knowledge. I know what I put in there, but I can't get it back out. But they're claiming to be able to pull things out of the body and out of nature with these processes that have multiple steps, and they don't even know what they're looking for in the first place.
Wow.
Like that's wild to me if you really think about it on a foundational level.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to what's your standard, right? And it's the same thing with like tests. We're talking about with lab tests or PCR, polymerase chain reaction. Any of these things. That was my thing with the virology stuff. They're like, oh, well, PCR that proves virus. It's like, okay, for a test to be valid, the test has to be tested against the real thing to see if it's
Right.
accurate. So where was the polymerase chain reaction test, which is nonsense anyway? But let's give it to them. Where was that validated against the gold standard of a virus?
Right.
Well, it's not there. And I mean, there were even people that literally just said, no, the PCR is the gold standard. It's like, that's not how it works. You can't have a test being its own gold standard. That's circular.
Circular
But
reason.
exactly. But
Yeah.
that's where we're at with all of this stuff. It really, I mean, I say
Affirming the
all.
consequence. It's a huge circle.
That's right.
90, would you say, which, I mean, it's hard to generalize, but would you say it's like 98 or 99% of all science today is Affirming the consequent, circular reasoning.
Yeah. I mean, I think by definition, it's all affirming the consequent anyway. And I know that's going to hurt
Okay.
people that I pushed science for so long as a positive thing, but I never did it because I believed it would yield what we wanted. I did it as a hostile witness against those claiming science. That's it. They can't claim it and then not even attempt it. Okay. I don't think it can do what we say because it's still affirming the consequent. If X, then Y, therefore X. Well, that's what you're doing in an experiment. You're appealing to your outcome to make your claim of causation. It seems more sciencey because you controlled some stuff in the process, but do you know infallibly that by you doing that, you created that effect? I don't know it infallibly, right? So now we're back to knowledge. We're back to what does knowledge mean?
Epistemology.
I mean, people think you're crazy when you say that, but if you really hold their feet to the fire and go, do you know without a shred of doubt at all that caused that? And how do you know that? You know what I mean? And a lot of people that are intellectually honest, I think, would say, I don't know for sure, but I believe it. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I believe every time I flip that light switch on and the light comes on, that's a cause and effect relationship that was caused by me flipping the light switch. Can I prove that that's the cause? Well, not without knowing, not without omniscience. I
Mm,
can't. And
mm.
that's why we're back to scripturalism. That's why for true knowledge to be held in your mind, meaning no possibility of error, it has to have been revealed to you from the only omniscient being that has that information.
Who knows all
Because
things?
there's who knows all things. That's
Mm,
just I don't know any other way around that.
mm.
People can appeal to common opinion all they want. That's fine. We all operate on induction. We all operate with common opinion. Yeah, I think if I do this, it's going to work this time. I don't know that. I don't
Yeah.
know that when I sit down in this chair next time, it's not going to buckle underneath me. You know what I mean? Like
The
it's
light
just
switch might not come on.
exactly.
Anything can change. Everything is changing. And
Yep.
just to like read that, I know Hawking's got his quote, he got the theory and hypothesis wrong, but
Right.
he basically pointed this out. And I got this from the idolatry of science. I think from that article you sent me from, who was it that wrote that?
Crap. It
I don't know
wasn't
if it was Raymond
Crampton.
or whoever, I don't know, but it was a Clark's follower.
That's right.
And he
Yep.
said, and he quoted this from Stephen Hawking, A Brief History of Time. And this was written in 1990. He says any physical theory is always provisional. It's in flux. It's in the sense that it is always only, it is only a hypothesis. You can never prove it. No matter how many times the results of experiments agree with some theory, you can
Mhm.
never be sure that the next time the result will not contradict the theory.
Right.
How do you know the thing that
Yep.
is always going to remain true?
That's
The
right.
only way, as you said, back to scripturalism, the only way we can know is if we know an omniscient God who knows all things and
Yep.
has revealed it to us.
Yep.
And that's why I
Yep.
always like I go back to Clark, scripturalism or suicide, intellectually suicide.
Yeah.
Irrationalism can't provide for you telos in this world. It can't give you
No.
a justification for epistemology, ethics, and,
That's
and,
right.
and metaphysics and what the world is. So
Right.
are you going to go back to? Well, scripture. Scripture is really the only option. But
You,
but go
yeah.
ahead. I was just gonna.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, it dovetails. When you talk about that,
Yeah,
without scripture, uh, without universal principles, you can't even get to our morality. And people don't like
that's
this one
right.
either.
Empiricism
But
doesn't provide for
you
morality because you
cannot
can't get an ought from an is.
exactly like
And
it's just so simple, but people hate that. They hate when you point that out and you go, okay, walk me through it. Walk me how through without you begging the question, how observing something tells you what ought to be morally
yeah,
for everyone universally. Just walk me through it. You can't do it because you can't have more terms in your conclusion than were in the premises to begin with. You
right.
can't. And that's people smuggle that crap in all the time, and you got to catch them on it. Again, goes back to thinking and recognizing logic and fallacies, because if you start catching these things, you don't have to be a freaking logician or a scholar or a philosopher. This is basic stuff. This is basic thinking. Kids get this stuff. It's burned out of us as we go through life with all
Yeah,
the nonsense pushed on us. But
right.
kids get it. They do. They ask the right questions and they go, well, that doesn't really make sense. Like they start putting the pieces together. But I wanted to read a quote from Karl
Go
Popper, if
ahead,
you're okay.
please.
Um, Karl Popper said this: although in science we do our best to find the truth, whatever, we are
Right.
conscious of the fact that we can never be sure whether we have got it. In
Mm,
science, there is no knowledge, quote unquote, in the sense in which Plato and Aristotle understood the word,
right.
in the sense which implies finality. In science, we never have sufficient reason for the belief that we have attained the truth. Einstein declared that his theory was false. He said that it would be a better approximation to the truth than Newton's, but he gave reasons why he would not, even if all predictions came out right, regard it as a true theory.
Wow.
Now, caveat here, Einstein did not have a scientific theory. Relativity is not a scientific theory. He did not do a single experiment in his life regarding relativity. Nobody did. And no, observing some stars around an eclipse is not an experiment for all the numpties who claim that. That's not an experiment, but it doesn't matter. He used the word theory wrong there, but the point is still there. And Popper understood the philosophical issues here of this. And that's why he understood falsification was the most powerful thing we can do, because falsification is a modus tollens. Falsification is if P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. If this, then that will follow. Well, that we don't find that, therefore the antecedent isn't there either. Right. That's the beauty of medical studies. That's the beauty of correlation studies, because if you truly believe if there is a causation, there should also be a correlation. Well, if there's no correlation at all, you can probably negate causation. You can probably mark it off the list. That's the power of those kind of studies. That's also the power of the scientific method. Falsification is built into it. And this is what, again, a lot of these guys don't understand. They'll start appealing to Popper about, oh, science is only about falsifying things. It's like, no, that's not true. The scientific method already has falsification built into it. That's your null hypothesis. That's
right.
X, not Y. If I do this, that thing won't occur. Well, do it and it doesn't happen, mark it off the list.
Right.
That's it. You falsified it. It's there. So they don't get off the hook by saying, oh no, we don't have to follow the scientific method. We just need to falsify. It's like, how do you do that? First of all. Secondly, that's already in the scientific method itself. So it's just a lot of minutia, when it comes, and this stuff, I've gotten away from it, honestly, just because I've gotten into more of the theological discussions, but it's important when you're talking about other topics, and you don't have to know any answers for these people, because they'll always do a burden of proof reversal on you, or often, not all of them, but most of them are not intellectually honest. So they'll try to turn it around and start asking you questions. Well, you explain this, this, and this. You explain it. And it's like, I'm not making a single claim, because once I make the positive claim, I'm on the hook for telling you how I know it. And I don't know. I don't have a clue. I can tell you what I believe based on scripture. I can tell you what I believe based on opinion in my life, but that has no bearing on the reality of the situation. I just think we get so lost in the weeds with this stuff because people are by nature, we're secular by nature, and we're mechanistic by nature, or at least moderns are. I don't know that they were in the past. If you go start reading Thales to Dewey and you read about all the different philosophies people had, and they're all over the place with storytelling. Storytelling for sure, but it wasn't just pure materialism. That was with like Democritus and those guys, the atomists, the true original atomists. But I think most of that stuff can be knocked out pretty easily if you start really thinking and talking about it. But regardless, this stuff is all I don't even know where I was going with that, but at the end of the day, stories are fine as long as we're admitting that we don't know, and here's my possible plausible reason for this happening, but I could be totally making that up. Leah and I do this every night. We will start talking about something, and I will start in my head coming up with a scenario to explain it, and I catch myself, or she catches me and goes, "You're making that up." And I go, I am. I'm making it up. And you know what the beauty is that you catch yourself and you admit that you're doing it. That's called being intellectually honest. And that's what we need to do. And then we're okay. We're all friends, right? Because they're like, hey, we don't know, man. We're just all speculating here.
Amen.
So, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, have you ever watched that? I was on a binge here watching Jurassic Park. I watched the newer one just recently, and I forgot about, I was just like, well, I'm gonna go back and watch the old one. Watch the first one, and I was laughing because you got these guys in the lab coats, right? And they have this mosquito that's in tree sap.
Yes.
1 trillion years old or whatever they said. And I know it's a movie. But I'm trying to make a point that I think this is what a lot of it is, storytelling. And they said this mosquito, bit a dinosaur and has the blood in the dinosaur, and they extracted the blood from this mosquito. And they don't tell you how they were able to connect the DNA and spawn the dinosaur egg, but you just kind of accept it and you're like, wow. All the kids are like, but I know it's a movie. But my point But that's what I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of the scientists or the pseudosciences are. And
Yeah.
it's like just making stuff up. But
Well, that's exactly what it is. And I know people don't like that term. I say storytelling a lot. I've even like even guys on my side are like, don't say storytelling. I'm like, I'm sorry, I call a spade a spade. It's what it is. We're speculating. We're telling tall tales to people want an answer for whatever it is. People want answers. That's the nature of humanity. We all want the ultimate answer is why am I here, right? Like we all ask
yeah,
everybody, like what is the purpose of this life?
yeah.
But people want answers for everything, whether it's why did I get sick? And if you can't tell me why I got sick, but I get mad at you. I had people, I can't tell you how many people come in going, I know I have a kidney stone. I go, oh, you know it. How do you know? I just know. Did your kidney tell you? Like, how do you know? And sometimes they're right, but most of the time they were wrong. How did I know? Well, thankfully, there's a test called a CT scan that has actually been studied against stones and has a pretty good 100% sensitivity, meaning if it's there, you'll find it, well, you show them their CT scan, there's no stone, there's no swelling on the kidney, there's nothing. And they're like, well, then why does my back hurt? They get mad at me because I don't have a story for why their back hurts. It's like, I don't know, but I can tell you what it's not. And that's the falsification part, right? It's not that because we didn't show that. And people hate it. They literally hate it. It's unbelievable how many people would get physically angry
Wow.
the doctors telling them good news that they didn't have a stone because they had already attached the story to their reality. And
Mm.
that's what everybody does with all these stories. I know I live on a globe because I see the stars move. I know that viruses are real because I got sick one time or I had the sniffles or whatever. It's all affirming the consequent. Every single time you do that and you appeal to those stories to prove something, you appeal to the effect to prove your story, you're doing it backwards,
Yeah.
right? Like you just are. And people need to recognize that. Like don't be a fallacious jerk. Just say, this is what I think happened, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. And
Yeah.
that's honest. Just be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's is good because pointing all this out as Christians, we don't really need to be scared of these people because I know that's the
No.
tendency. We have to we feel like we're on the hook and we
Yep.
have to justify
Yep.
everything. But if we really just say, look, I'm not, just keep asking them, how do you know? How do you justify? And I really think that's really, it's not even reversing. I don't even think that's what it is. I just think we're just claiming, look, I believe this, the scriptures, they say this. That's my, Clark said, indemonstrable axiom,
That's right.
starting point. Nobody can really prove their starting point. I am buying that more and more as I'm learning this stuff because I'm starting to see, empiricism itself is built on a non-empirical starting point. You
That's
don't
right.
really, you don't observe that empiricism is true by
That's right.
observing that empiricism is true.
That's right.
You start with that, and everyone has it. It's indemonstrable, but they make up stories to try to demonstrate, and that's the problem. And once they start to make up stories, is when it starts to become. I think you said affirming the consequent, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's I think my issue. But would you say like if we believe in scripture, we're not bound to that, are we? Like we're just believing the
We're
scripture.
believing it. But here's where it comes into play is with all the discussions we've been seeing lately, let's say in the preterist world, right?
Yeah.
Like tons of those arguments are affirming the consequent fallacies because
Yeah.
people are appealing to their predetermined system and saying, see, it works. Okay, well, works for what? Anything can work for your intended goal. Like I can make up whatever story or reverse engineer a story to fit something and then make all the pieces fit. I can make it coherent, right? This is why I don't like the coherency theory of truth. Just because you have a story that's coherent, meaning not contradictory, that doesn't mean it's true. Truth is not the same thing as being logical, right? It's not the
Mm.
same. There are tons of fiction stories that are completely coherent, tons of novels that are coherent, that are not
Yeah.
violating the rules of logic, right? Doesn't mean they're not making stuff up, but that's not the point. When it comes to actual logic, that's just how to reason, premises to conclusions. So when you're trying to just make something work and they go, well, if you read it through this lens, it'll make sense to you. It's like I can read it through whatever lens I want and it'll make sense to me. I can make it make sense.
Oh yeah.
That doesn't make it true. And
Yeah.
so it does apply in the biblical world as well. Not only that, but the tons of Christians metric ton import all this pseudoscientific nonsense into their evidences for Christianity
Oh yeah.
or evidences for the Bible. And that's not okay. You
Yeah.
cannot prove the Bible. What is you're saying you've got a standard of
That's
proof that can't give you actual proof, and you're putting that over the Bible?
mm,
That's crazy.
yeah.
I mean, it really is if you really think about it on that level, because you go, okay, they'll appeal to archaeology, and you're like, okay, how does archaeology prove what? Walk me through the steps of what these people found and the claims that are being made, and how you have to take it every claim. You have to go in there with them and go dive deep and go, let's walk through it together. Let's go to the paper that you're talking about. Let's walk through the methods. I mean, I did this for 2 years straight, and not everybody's going to do this. I had 300 tabs or more open on my Google Chrome of nothing but studies from the early 1900s, late 1800s of virology papers, because I had to do that to understand their methodology, their mindset, what they were claiming, to be able to then ask the questions that I needed to ask. And now all I got to do is go to the materials and methods sections on a paper, read it, and go, it's nonsense. Like, they've already off the rails. They're begging so many questions just right here and right here, right here. And so, but you have to study that stuff in depth, and most people aren't going to take the time. And I get that. That's not the point. But the point is to just start asking the questions. But yeah, Christians love bringing in nonsense into their quote unquote evidences because they think it's helping them against these atheists, when neither side has a clue what they're talking about when it comes to evidence at all.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing with intelligent design. It's the same crap. It's
Yeah.
just as bad as evolution. They're using the same rules, meaning fallacies, to to build a story that they think helps theism. It's like, you're not helping anything. You're just helping people learn how to be fallacious.
Wow.
Just, we don't need to
So
do it.
yeah, so the alternative is believe it. I mean,
It is.
would you say that's people want to say, well, that's fideism.
So what?
So what? That's what I
That's what
said. That's
Augustine,
what I
the
said.
best quote in the world from Augustine, if he's the one that said it, and if he even
Oh
existed,
yeah, I
I don't
remember.
know. I
Yeah.
believe that I may understand. You
Amen.
have to believe something before you can even understand anything. You have to have some premises in your mind that you cannot prove, that just to get off the ground with reasoning to other conclusions.
Yeah.
If you could prove every premise, you'd end up in infinite regress of how you prove that. How'd you prove
Yeah,
that? How'd you
that's
prove that?
right. That's the problem. That's the problem, the infinite regress. And
Exactly.
I don't want to go there. So I mean, like you said,
No.
I mean, I'm believing the Bible and I'm dogmatic about it. I mean, I'm gonna
Yep.
tell you, like, yeah, straight up. Do I have my interpretations? Are they always right?
Oh,
No.
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 No, absolutely not. They're
No.
not always right from the Bible. But do I know the scripture is God's word, infallible? Yeah, I do. Why? Because the Holy Spirit bears witness to my spirit that I know
Exactly.
I am the Son of God, a
Exactly.
child of God. Can I
Yep.
prove that? No, I
No.
can't, but
No.
I believe it.
That's
So
right.
so people are like, "Oh, but you can't prove it. So you don't really know." And that's what they want for evidence. Well,
That shows they don't know. They've never
know
studied
what
the topic.
evidence is, and they
That's
don't.
right.
This is what I ask these guys, and then I force them back that they can't justify, they can't give me evidence for the future, in the sense of how the future is going to resemble the past. They can't do
Right.
that. Then they're believing in the future by
Yeah.
faith in the same way I'm believing in the Bible by
Yeah.
faith. So
Yeah.
point that out to them, show them that they're standing in the same boat. And I don't know. I mean, I do this stuff too, but
I love it. And I think the best thing I heard, Jim Bob said it, I think it may have been where he's like, give me the evidence for evidence.
I said that, yeah, I said that to one guy. Someone was like, "Show me the evidence for your God," and I said, "Show me the evidence for your evidence."
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, read the debate. You read it with Vincent
yeah,
Chung
yeah.
and I mean,
Destroyed the guy. Oh my
just
gosh.
because, and you have to be pedantic, but he destroyed it. Like, what when the definition of the word is, even little things like
Oh,
that. Like, you get into these metaphysical, categorical concepts that are intangible, untouchable, can't be studied in a lab, and they lose their mind. Well, they just have to beg the question. Well, that's just the chemicals in my brain. It's like, okay, well,
oh,
you're just asserting things. Then you can't, you know what I mean? Like, and then if it's just chemicals randomly doing anything, then you lose all meaning, because my
yeah.
chemicals bumping into each other are different than yours. So
No
you can't
telos.
say, yeah, you can't say one's right or wrong. You can't argue. Argumentation ceases once meaning ceases.
Yeah.
Once you can't communicate and once meaning is gone, you can't talk with anybody.
Wow. That's good.
Um, yeah.
Telos really is keep finding yeah, but anyways, we're going,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I love it,
It's
man. I
fun.
really
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on and talking about all this stuff because I want to have you on more about this because even just reacting to some of these atheist clips, or even just like some of their what they're saying, I think it would be fun to just to pick apart
It
and
would.
just
Yeah.
just go on these tangents because I do it to my wife and I do it on the videos, but I need you to do it. Help me out with it because
Oh, it would be fun just to do a few, and not to, this isn't to make people look stupid. It's important teaching
yeah,
points, and when you can take certain, because a lot of these atheists, they're just not well studied. There are atheists out there that I
I
think are
know.
honest, intellectually honest. It's rare, but that's rare everywhere. It's rare to find an intellectually honest Christian. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it's not just atheists. So, but to find some where they're making and saying certain things, but they're doing it, let's say, in a nice way. You can do it with like quotes from Russell or Dawkins,
Yeah.
even not Dawkins is kind of a jerk, but Bertrand Russell, not a dumb guy.
No, he was smart.
Man, I mean, and good on a lot of things until he wasn't. And it's like, how can somebody this who seems to get it
No.
completely contradict themselves with the next sentence? And I see it all the time, and Christians do it too. And so that's the blind spots, right, that we're talking about. And that's what I think we need to, because Leah and I talk about this all the time. Like, what's my blind spot? What am I doing that's contradictory that I don't even know? I need somebody to point out to me and go, hey man, you say this, but you're actually saying that over there. And it's like,
Yeah.
I need to not do that. We need to, all
Think
Christians
about
especially, hold each other feet to the fire, because it is sinful, in my opinion, to be fallacious. You know,
yeah.
you and I talked about that the other day, that these are mental lazy shortcuts.
Yeah.
And you can't do that, especially when we're talking about the Bible. I think with other Christians, you don't need to do it. But when you're talking with unbelievers, we look like unbelievers. We look like
Yeah.
fools when we argue fallaciously. And you
Yeah.
see it in so many Christian circles, so many cringy evidentialist Christian
Mhm.
circles. And it's like, you guys just, because these atheists think they're getting the win over these people. It's like, no, you're not getting a win.
Both of you guys are
You
bad.
just both,
Both
yeah, you just
bad.
both don't know how to think about it. I'm not saying I know all the ways to think about things. Clark didn't. I mean, there's people still trying to develop Clark's epistemology, further. None of that actually really matters, because a lot of that's still storytelling. These are men coming up with man-made systems to try to explain how we can know anything in the first place. And you're like, well, what is know? What is knowledge? What is that? Like, you know what I mean? Like they can't even really tell you. We have to, at the end of the day, go by faith in something. You have to.
Have to.
Everybody does. Everybody starts with belief in something, even if they don't realize that's what it is. That's where they're starting from. And we all have these different lenses that we view the world through, but we also have these certain presuppositions that we bring to the table. And that's, I think, the beauty of asking these questions, is let's roll
Mm.
back some of those presuppositions to the foundational level and see if we actually have a clue what we're talking about at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
No, I really appreciate that. And I just I love it because you said it and you nailed it right on the head. It is intellectual, especially for Christians, it's intellectually dishonest and it's sinful because God has created us to be logical and to be um, like him in the sense of that we are to think his thoughts after him. And God is logical. I think Robinson said
absolutely.
logic is the architecture of God's mind. We are created by God and we are to be logical because, we are his creatures.
Yep.
And when to the degree that we depart from that, it's sin. And like you said, for Russell, how would he, like at the beginning of Why I'm Not a Christian, he started to smuggle in all of this stuff about, these ethical claims against Christianity.
Yeah.
Wait, how did you justify any of that? How do you
Yeah.
just you contradict yourself, and then you have them quoting omnipotent matter rolls on its relentless way. So how do you bring those two together?
Yeah.
First of all, you're making ethical judgments against Christianity, and then at one point you're saying omnipotent matter rolls on its relentless way. You never bring those two together, but the
No.
Bible calls that sin.
Yeah.
Intellectually, it is sin, and it's
Yeah.
dishonoring your creator. But
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, like you said, what we are to do is just work it through, go back and get to the foundational levels. But at the end of the day, like you said, you have to have faith.
Yep.
God, and I go back to Ecclesiastes 3, God has fixed eternity into our hearts, but yet we can't figure it out.
Yeah.
And I find comfort in that. People don't, but I do.
I man,
God,
I
God's the king.
100% agree. Like I can't, you couldn't have said it better. And Ecclesiastes is a fantastic book that completely annihilates empiricism.
Yeah, it does.
Well, Paul annihilates both empiricism and pure rationalism. And I can't remember if it's in Acts or where it is, or maybe Corinth. I don't even remember which book. I'm bad with Bible memorization. Where he said, Jews seek a sign and the Greeks seek wisdom. So that's empiricism
Yeah.
and that's rationalism, and neither one are how we operate. We operate based on God's word.
Yep.
Um, and it's okay not to know. Remember I was telling you, like some people like waylay Robbins because he talked about knowledge, and they're like, well, then that means I can't know Chinese history. It's like, who cares?
Yeah.
What does that matter?
Oh,
You can speculate, but you can't know any real history. How would you know it? I always tell people, y'all can't even prove what I ate for lunch 2 days ago. You guys would have no clue what I ate for lunch. And you're talking about proving things from thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of supposed years ago. Like, it's insane.
you don't know
But
their mind. Yeah. Anyways, yeah.
yeah,
But I,
another topic.
I just love it. But
Yeah.
like I said, everyone, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and share this with a friend. I mean, I know this probably is tough for some people to swallow and digest,
Well, the
but
comments will be interesting.
yeah, I think so. But some people don't. Yeah. Anyways, people don't
Yeah.
like to think, but and that's okay. I know it's not okay, but it's not okay to not think. But people don't like to think about this stuff. They want to
Right.
go back to their
Yes,
simple, like, play games and stuff like that. That's
that's
fine,
right.
whatever. But
Yep.
anyways, thanks for coming on, Jordan. I really
Yeah,
appreciate
brother.
your time,
Yep.
and we're gonna have to do it again. But
Yep.
let you
Anytime, man.
all see you on the next
Loved
one.
it. Loved it. Loved it.